How did I get interested in Soviet environmental history, Russian environmental history? Well, when I was a student in Portland, Oregon at Reed College, I began to be interested in Russia, take Russian history classes, ended up writing a diploma работа on the intelligentsia. But I also started to think, how have historians really, why haven't they looked at the relationships to the natural world? And then I realized, wait, there's this whole big field of environmental history out there, but there was only, 3-4 books, something like that, that had dealt with Russia and the Soviet Union. So I thought, okay, this needs to be a topic that I'm going to pursue. And then I applied and I got a grant, a Fulbright, to be a student in the master's program at the European University in St. Petersburg, where I got connected with an entire group of historians there who, not only did I start to study Russian environmental history, but environmental history. I remember reading sort of some of the classics in the field of global environmental history with the group at the European University. There's also so many topics in Russian environmental history and Soviet environmental history that are out there that people can use, and they could really help us understand human relationships with the natural world better. I think, one thing with the Soviet period that stands out to me is simply the fact that a very different political economy emerged in the Soviet system. Socialism, state socialism, communism, whatever we want to call it. It was attempting a very different type of relationship with the natural world because of the larger political project. And I think investigating what that meant from a nuanced, sophisticated way is, I think, really important still. And there's deeper insights to be gained. Of course, the diversity of Russia itself, in terms of its peoples, in terms of its environments, also adds a lot to global environmental history. Someone could imagine someone could be studying the steppe grasslands and comparing them with grasslands elsewhere in the world, or looking at the taiga to understand forest dynamics better, or looking at permafrost, which of course Russia has a huge amount of, and which poses a very important issue for global climate issues today. And sort of studying the history of these ideas can really help not just understand the history of Russia and the Soviet Union better, but to help understand global environmental history better. So there's a lot of, so thinking about what literature out there really influenced me the most in terms of environmental history. I mean, obviously, just in terms of a narrative of how I came to be, some of the early works by Douglas Wiener and Paul Josephson were very important. But then I would say also works by John McNeill about the global environmental history were quite important. So was theoretical work not only on Russia, but on socialist Hungary. So one of the people, there's this book by Zsuzsa Gile about waste regimes in Hungary that was very important for my thinking about how to approach Russia's environmental history. Ultimately, I would say though, and then of course, well, there's new works. So there's a work by Pei that didn't necessarily influence me, but have been important because I've been thinking with these authors as they've been developing these projects. These are authors like Pei Chu, who wrote a new book about the life of permafrost, with Shiba Demuth, who's also a historian of the Arctic, and wrote a book called Floating Coast. And many others. I don't want to go too much far because I could leave out people who have been very influential, but yeah. So what should be done for the environmental history of Russia and the Soviet Union, especially as it relates to the current condition of the Anthropocene? Well, I think there's a lot of topics that are out there. I mean, more in-depth and detailed studies of regions and places and ecologies that exist in this diverse country, of course, are very welcome. And especially ones that connect to transnational questions. So, studies of pollution that don't necessarily write about pollution in the world, but are very much informed by pollution as a global phenomenon, as a phenomenon of the Anthropocene, of this geological epoch that we're now living in, I think is really important. I would also say, of course, one field that I very much would like to see developed more is the study of climate history, which is related to environmental history, but is somewhat different and has a different relationship. And this isn't just the study of the science of climate science, which we have some good work on already, but also the study of how Russia's climate has affected human behavior and adaptations and understandings throughout history. I think there's a lot of work to be done on that, and including some historical climatology work, meaning sort of reconstructing past climates in order to understand human developments. So what sort of works would I want to see done in the field of environmental history related to Russia and the Soviet Union? I mean, this is a great question, and I think there's a lot of fantastic topics out there. Of course, it's a kind of hard question to answer because when I think of it, I'm always thinking of what should I do, what topics might I want to research, and so that can be a very difficult process. So I'll emphasize the sort of I would really like to, for instance, see a history of the Russian Revolution that really puts environmental factors into the conversation. I would like to see more studies of agriculture and drought, for instance. There's some good work that's been done on that, but I think a lot more could be done on that. And sort of also reading some of these, for instance, there's a literature about famines and disasters in Russian history, and it often has devolved into this debate about whether it was caused by nature or caused by people, which the answer, of course, is never one or the other. There's almost always these factors that, diverse factors that come into play. So if we're going to be looking at natural disasters, really doing it in a way that understands the depth of and the intricacies of these relationships. I guess finally I would say, I'm a historian who does like to look to the future sometimes. So things like the history of wildfires, a very contemporary topic right now, is something that I could see being very interesting, not just for its past relevance, but for its future relevance. So the work in Tyumen on advancing the environmental humanities and environmental history of Russia has been just astronomical and impressive over the past just few years. There's been many grants, one I've been part of about the Anthropocene, that's bringing together scholars to sort of think about what is Siberia's place in this new geological epoch and how we might interrogate it, how we might think about the contestations of knowledge that emerge about it. It's also gone from there being a center sort of on the study of humans, nature, and technology to now there being a whole new school for the study of society and environment. And I think that that's really sort of aiming at bringing interdisciplinary discussions and conversations between historians and other humanists and natural and social scientists about environmental issues. And I think that the research that could come out of these projects really could change the field, both within Russia itself, but then also within international conversations about all sorts of issues that come out of maybe the study of Russia, but affect the environmental humanities and social sciences writ large. So on my first main project in the field of Soviet environmental history was resulted in the book that came out in 2016, The Nature of Soviet Power and Arctic Environmental History. And in that book, I took the approach of looking at a particular region, the Kola Peninsula, the Murmansk region in the far northwest of the country, and studying the sort of long Soviet experience, looking at starting from the late imperial period and going into the post-Soviet era, but really trying to understand what we can learn about the Soviet project from looking at this region that went from, less than 10,000 people to the most populated part of the Arctic with severe environmental problems, a huge built-up military, and a huge industrial base. And so that was sort of the approach I took was let's look very deeply at a single region, but then kind of have these questions about the country at large in it. And so then in the book itself, I ended up organizing it by looking at different industries. I looked at road construction, especially with the Murmansk Railroad. I looked at the development of phosphate mining in Apatiti and Kirovsk in the Stalinist period. Especially. I looked at the reindeer economy and how it sort of transformed from more of a herding still mostly more of a hunting economy to a herding economy to a sort of type of Soviet pastoralism under collectivization and beyond, and then the creation of state farms. I looked at the development of the nickel and copper industry and how these became sort of sources of acute pollution in the late Soviet period, and how to understand that development, because it ended up playing a very important role in the Soviet Union's environmental reputation, that there was such acute pollution at this time period. But part of what I argue is that there were very specific contextual factors that led to that type of surge in pollution in the 70s and 80s. And then I finally look at the energy economy, going from coal and hydroelectric dams up into the nuclear buildup on the Kola Peninsula. In all of this, of the book, I'm making several arguments. So I'm making an argument about the Soviet approach to understanding nature. So for one thing, there's this idea that the Soviet Union was sort of driven by Prometheanism, by the desire to transform all nature into humans, subdue all nature. But I found that while that impulse was there and discussed, it also existed with this idea of creating harmony with the natural world. And it was often two sides of the same coin, even were being expressed. And it varied in some ways, in part by the difficulties that emerged in the industrialization process. That kind of leads me to a second point, which I sort of emphasize, which is that I think that we can view Soviet power slightly differently from an environmental perspective, and that's where the name of it, the name of the book is The Nature of Soviet Power, is a play, because it's saying nature is part of needs to be part of our understanding of what Soviet power was, and I do that by looking at how things like the behavior of reindeer, or the qualities of mineral ore, or the swamps that they built roads on, or the trees that sort of disintegrated while after the railroad was built, how all of these sort of showed that nature itself was playing a role, serving as an actor, and not an actor just that's because humans didn't understand everything enough. That sort of unanticipated part of it was very important in my analysis, is that the natural world is not something that humans sort of have ever fully controlled or can fully control, and that this capacity to kind of bite back and influence human history in unexpected and unanticipated ways is something that's important for understanding the very specific type of power that came to exist in the Soviet Union. Now this leads to this big question that's, has come up with a lot. So this was based on a large part on actor network theory, theories of people like Bruno Latour, Timothy Lecain, neo-materialism is what it's sometimes called. And it brings up questions about, wait, how can you say that that flower has agency, or this tree has agency, right? And I would just say I sort of tried to sidestep that question a little bit. I insist on that if the tree is an actor, and if something, all of a sudden a branch were to hit me, it'd be somehow that it is a story that needs to be told, that this tree was able to function as an actor in the story. But I don't necessarily need to say that the tree has intention, right? That's sort of the main contribution, I think, of actor network theory is not that, is that you get at the ability of the natural world to sort of participate in history without needing to say, I know what the tree was thinking, because the tree wasn't thinking, right? Okay. And then a final thing I just wanted to say on the book, my first book, was that one of the last big sort of argument that I make is connecting it to the Anthropocene, connecting it to the Soviet experience, to modernization projects writ large, what I end up calling the communist Anthropocene, because I think that this is a different trajectory towards the Anthropocene than what we're often used to thinking about, which is sort of industrial capitalism going haywire. This is a different way that drastically increasing environmental pressures came to exist in the global world. So it's a global sort of comparative lens of the Arctic that I emphasize there. So my current book project is a history of the Tunguska explosion and the efforts to understand it. This is a large explosion over Siberia in 1908 that was likely the airburst explosion of a fragment of a stony asteroid, but became a source of mystery and contestation and debate in the Soviet period. I came to the topic because I was looking for an event in Russian Soviet history that was not sort of wedded to some of our typical narratives about the country and about its environmental experience, and also was something concrete where I kind of knew exactly, here's a story, here's a compelling story, here's a story that frankly people want to read a book about. And what can I do then and add as a scholar to make it enlightening as well as and enriching and informative. So I came to that, and what I ultimately, the story is so interesting and has so many different angles, but what I ultimately came down to is that what I think is the most unique and important part of the environmental story of Tunguska is the function of mystery as both something where the natural world has its own capacity to surprise and confound human beings. So this goes back to sort of some of the neo-materialism that I was talking about and that I developed in my first book, but also then as a cultural practice that is put on a landscape. I call the Tunguska site a landscape of mystery in the book. And it's a landscape of mystery because, first off, the way that humans engage with the territory from the time of the blast on is above all related to this attempt to solve a mystery. So whether they go there and they drain bogs to try to find fragments of a meteorite, or later on try to protect it from industrial encroachment. These are all sort of operating on a fairly distinctive logic for something in environmental history. We're used to, industrialization or plowing lands into agriculture, or making them be bomb test sites or war zones. There's all sorts of common processes that we look at in environmental history, and I'm saying that this whole process of mystery solving is one of the big things there. It also leads to interesting questions about scientific and non-scientific knowledge and where the boundaries of that are, and as well as it informs us a lot about disasters, both historic and today. I mean, I think it's really important to appreciate that humans have lived through the impact of an asteroid that could have wiped people out. So when we think about the larger spatial and time scale and temporal scales of human existence and human history, the fact that we've lived with something and we can stay with the trouble and we can figure out how to make a mess, how to better live and cope and strive for something better, even in the world that we have today, which is facing a lot of environmental crises. The fact that we've lived with something that already could be total annihilation means that what are we going to do but stay with the trouble and try to persevere and find ways to improve the situation. So in terms of future research for my own sake, I'm not sure what I want to do. In some ways I feel I'm at a moment of wanting to sit back and think about things a little bit. I mean, we're always in a rush to do science, but sometimes it's good to sit with, when you finish a big project, which I feel I've just finished, to sit with it for a little bit. So a topic that I've been interested in for future research is looking back at Soviet socialism and the question of growth. I think that when we think about pressures on the natural world, a lot of it comes from the need to continually grow economies, and this often has negative effects on natural environments, and it requires the use of more and more of the natural world. And so thinking about what lessons from the Soviet attempt to have a very different type of world in terms of its relationship with nature could we learn for today. So this might just be a project that I sort of spend some time thinking about and don't ever do anything with, but it's kind of where my head is right now. So where might the future of the study of Russian and Soviet environmental history be, especially given the summer school happening here in Tyumen and the work of the new school that's come into existence? I think that increasingly, thanks to these efforts, we're going to have more and more work coming out of from Russian scholars that are going to be diversifying and nuancing and really challenging some of the perspectives of foreign scholars that have developed over time. I think that for a while most of the work in environmental history on Russia was being done, or maybe not most, but a major portion of it was being done by foreign scholars. And I think that's on the cusp of changing. And I think that's a very good thing, because I think that this is an important field for international science, global science, and I think it's an important to be learning from the people who actually know the richness of the region the best because they live there. So I mean, I don't mean to downplay the contributions of scholars like me who have dedicated our lives to studying the environmental history of Russia, but we can clearly learn a lot from the scholars who are based here and live here and have started and have worked here.